Typically, this is a country in which white people control most positions of power. And the local news often reflects that. The people who are sources for local news stories are often people from powerful positions. And local news is often written with the suburban audience in mind, people that have money to buy the products that are advertised during a news program. You don't usually see poor people, people on the margins represented in the news in terms of as main sources, except of course in crime stories.
Well, the shooting happened around 6 o'clock this evening on a very busy corner in Avondale.
Police say he held up 4 stores in Cincinnati. He's also being tied to a number of stolen cars used during those robberies.
And then they say he was ramming their car until police came to the rescue.
The victim is 31-year-old Lana Brown.
They're trying to get some more answers from detectives to determine what happened.
Typically, when low-income people or black people are in the local news, it's because of crime stories in their neighborhoods. It's who got murdered yesterday. And local news does this very routinely, the same way over and over. They've been telling these stories the same way for 40 years with very little change. And it's mostly because consultants told them to do this back in the 60s and local news stations started making money at it. But there's really probably a lot more that goes on in poor neighborhoods than crime. People conduct their everyday lives. Black people, for example, don't use drugs in any higher percentage than the rest of the population. In fact, there have been studies that recently show that drug abuse is going down in black communities faster than it's going down in white communities. Well, if the media are always representing poor people as involved in drug problems or killing each other, even though this is not typically what goes on, even in poor neighborhoods on a daily basis, then these are not representative images or images that represent what daily life is like for a lot of lower middle class people or working people. It is not day-to-day life, but it becomes the stereotype of representation for a particular group. For white middle class neighborhoods, you usually don't get police cars pulling up in vans with reporters spilling out of the back. This doesn't happen in suburban neighborhoods. Suburban neighborhoods wouldn't stand for it. But in poor neighborhoods, this happens fairly routinely. What there is here is a lack of imagination in the local news on how we tell stories. It's been very formulaic for a very long time. Occasionally, I think a good station with good leadership will say, you know, I think we should do this a different way. Accumulating, just tallying up who got killed in what poor community yesterday or what kind of drug deal went down, how does that really serve the larger community? Particularly when a lot of these are stories of individual arguments, family disputes, personal problems, but they all end up standing in for a particular neighborhood or a particular community and reinforcing stereotyped images about a certain section of the city. And what we end up saying is, this is what happens here. This is what life is like here. Occasionally we might have stories that celebrate holidays, for instance, like Martin Luther King Day. We celebrate these holidays, they're covered routinely, there's parades and events, and then people ask, well, why is anybody complaining about civil rights? Why does anybody complain that we haven't made progress? You know, look at the Martin Luther King Day celebrations. You know, the civil rights movement was back in the 60s. We really don't have racism anymore. And all you have to do is look at poverty, look at Hurricane Katrina, look at what groups are poorer than other groups, look at what jobs people hold and the inequality that's there. This is a large institutional problem, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of work to achieve equity and undo years of historical and cultural mistakes.